Alright, so this is a video. This ADHD Musing is a collection of like these two, what was supposed to be about 10-minute TikToks from about a week ago that I was going to upload as a response because a friend of mine did make a comment in this video that is very important. And I think about how the fact that I made that video pretty heavily and somewhat crassly as like a joke in relation to something else, that because of that, the subject matter could definitely be carried by some people in a very harmful way. So I wanted to first clarify that, and then it got me thinking too about like the general subject matter and how it relates to me personally, like in matters I was already wanting to talk about last year in relation like public discussion of mental health around like Kanye West, and also thinking about personal experiences with people who have become somewhat deviant in their behavior, like deviant, like they've just become, I'm not going to say that everyone's a pariah, but like people who have pissed off a number of people that I've known personally, or other people that they know personally, and people who have affected my own life through their questionable behavior, who also happen to be people with like mental, I may go as far as to say disabilities, but like mental problems, mental illnesses, people I've known with mental illnesses. So that is a subject matter that I've collected all this in. It was like 2 long ass videos. There's a part I'm literally just going to break up for further elaboration. There's like another 6 minutes tagged on there, and then closing it out with like a re-recording for like probably another 15 minutes. This is just a long ass talking video. So if anyone gives a shit about the subject matter, it's virtually a podcast. That's basically a fucking podcast, right? Listen to this stupid shit. I'm honestly about tired of people acting like Chris Benoit's mental state shouldn't even be taken into consideration when discussing what he did to his family. Given that outside of Buddhism, the mass majority of you motherfuckers on the planet is following Abrahamic religions. Get the fuck out. This is true. This is important. I'm glad that it was actually said, because that needs to be noted, how big of a problem that would be if from this sentiment in this video, the idea is taken that the actions of this man are defensible, or that he needs the glorification of him needs to be defended, like he needs an asterisk by his actions or something. When in reality, that's a crazy ass hill to die on. And I'm gonna go ahead and preface with a couple of things, starting with the fact that I'm not about to do that shit. I'm not going to bat for Chris fucking Benoit. I'm not even describing the video. I'm saying, like, the video aside, don't come to me for defending anybody. Do not come to me for defending Chris Benoit. The fucking crossface is not that goddamn cool of a move. This is legit NEDM 2024. I'm not doing that. Another bit of preface that I feel should be said in relation to what I'm saying, that I don't think is going to be received well. I feel like most people who would hear this would not necessarily like to hear that the commentary on Chris Benoit is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference, specifically to compare the way that people try to take a very much more realistic observation of modern problems, that we, for whatever reason, I mean, I kind of know the reason, but we don't apply this to religious scenarios. For some reason, we try to observe religious situations in their context, and it's like, that's fine for observation of why something was written or explained the way it is, but not when you're applying it to life, including in relation to worship. Like, at some point, you gotta admit, like, this whole thing is ran by a guy. This whole thing was founded supposedly by a guy who said God told him to unalive his son. That's weird. That's real weird. Also, it's very likely that Judaism is a Canaanite cult. Another note is to keep in mind that anything that I have said or will say momentarily about Chris Benoit that may be inaccurate, or if I'm omitting any important facts, like specific things that would contradict this sentiment about him that I'm about to bring forward, naturally feel free to correct. As I will personally say, I have just never been interested enough in this man, like sincerely interested, like not facetiously, but actually been that concerned with Chris Benoit to really look into his legacy. What I do know of him is the experiences of the last 5 years, assuredly, over this 20-year incident when I first heard about this, and one ridiculous story about how I first heard about it. But the last 5 years, I feel, because I think there was a documentary about the WWE that came out about 5 years ago, where people have started to become more vocal about him due to new information that has arisen. I never watched that shit. I never watched it, and I never looked up what the specific details were. I was told things from like an old coworker, and occasionally I would hear some sentiments online. Those sentiments are primarily what I'm about to talk about, because it definitely goes beyond Chris Benoit and has way more to do with the politics around mental health in America. I'm using the word politics in this particular scenario. Actually, no, I want to say I'm using it pretty accurately. The way that most people would refer to sociopolitics, and generally speaking of politics and social order, and how we refer to mental health in more of an emotional fashion than a cognitive, than something that would be understood by a person who primarily uses cognitive empathy to observe the logic of how a society refers to mental health. So I have this friend that we used to talk about. I remember it was probably about 2 years ago. I had to have said something mentioning Chris Benoit in passing, and I know that she was very vocal. Probably, again, this was around the time when like people were learning more about the actual incident. She was very vocal in specifically referring to him as a family annihilator. This is when I first heard that this was, I'm assuming, a sociological term. And she was basically expressing her disdain for this person. I don't think at the time she had mentioned anything about the domestic abuse that I feel like I've heard reference to. Again, I've never looked up the actual details, but hearing other people's recalling of the details, it is implied to me that he was apparently abusive of his wife before this took place, and that's another thing that people that people have a problem with. Have a problem with fucking domestic abuse. So it's pretty straightforward. I do feel like a lot of her problem with this person was with Chris Benoit, was specifically probably the perspective that a lot of people had. I don't think I said anything that would have triggered that response as much as and also knowing she's not typically online, she probably has had legitimate real life interactions, typically with men who were defending this man, probably pretty vigorously. And I want to say within maybe that year, there was a pretty famous female, I want to say wrestler or athlete, to some degree. She also suffered from CTE, or she suffered from CTE. I don't even know if that's a diagnosis for Chris Benoit, but this person was suffering from CTE. She terminated her own existence, and I feel that friend made the comment to me, in what felt like a fit of desperation almost, that she at least, presenting something as noble in the fact that at least she ended her own life instead of harming anyone else. She had the good sense or the decency to do that. At which point I'm thinking, that feels like you were pushing a narrative right now, like you were trying to reconcile something you understand, because I don't feel like this is a place to be looking for a silver lining here. Like, that woman is gone. This is not a good thing. So I'm keeping this perspective in mind for like the next few years of looking at how social media and how just general public commentary takes place in relation to mental health. 2023, Kanye West goes on not even a tirade at first. He ends up in a ridiculous controversy, which I feel like I should talk about in another video. Long time coming, because there's some things to take into consideration there that have less to do with that man and more to do with America and its responses to things in relation to race. But in 2023, I remember there was a writer on Twitter whose name I can't really remember because I didn't find her through her writing. I found her through her online personality. She would say witty stuff I thought was funny. Never got around, and she hasn't been posting as much as late, so I never really got around to finding out who she is. Maybe she's just not on Twitter anymore. All I do know is that she said something that I thought nobody else was going to say during that Kanye West controversy. About a day or two before I see this post, I am in a car with my friend who works with many neurodivergent people, disabled people, and he's regaling me with what he's seen recently about the controversy with Kanye West. And his commentary is what a lot of people online were saying, is that they're tired of hearing about him, his bipolarism, and that this doesn't defend things specifically from the stance of saying no one believes that any of this can be attributed to bipolarism, because as everyone's commentary goes, and even as he started to feed in, there's no one I know people who have neurodivergent problems and this does not occur. They're not spouting anti-Semitism, they're not talking about racism, or they're not saying racist things, which admittedly he stopped himself. He was aware of what was happening because he had remembered he just told me not 2 minutes ago about a story of a neurodivergent person he works with, who everyone just has to acknowledge sometimes he's going to say some wildly racist things, and they have to deal with that in his job. They need to find out how to interact with him and how to have him work with other people. I'm running short on this, and I still have a few more things to say about personal experiences with this, so I will come back to this video in another video. Alright, part 2, trying not to tangent. I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. So, in the last bit, I'm talking about how I'm in the car with this friend, and he's telling me about how, people are pointing out this is not something that is excused by bipolarism. About a day or so later, I started seeing more of these posts online myself, with people pointing out a lot of the same anecdotal stories. A lot of, I have a cousin who has autism, and he hasn't said anything anti-Semitic yet. This man is just a racist. And, that kind of thing. I have a brother, I take care of a brother who has bipolarism. He hasn't done this. Like, I don't see where this is coming from. This can't have anything to do with this bipolarism. And in the midst of all this writer who I was talking about, she posts this comment. Again, typically she says funny stuff. She's usually just joking about things, but this was occasionally she'll say something rather serious, and this was one of those moments, something intelligent and serious about a severe issue. She prefaces this with pointing out, I do not condone anything that Kanye West has done or said. Smart move. Very important that she said that. She does point this out, that she does not condone anything that Kanye West has been doing. That said, she points out that this is gross and honestly a rather ableist behavior, that people are trying to identify whether or not this behavior of his as of late is actually caused by bipolarism, primarily because it is effectively, I feel like my input on this paraphrasing of what she was saying is that this is pseudoscience. This is pseudoscience. It's social media pseudoscience. It is amateur diagnoses of severe and serious mental issues, where people are trying to claim, what people are trying to do is identify whether or not a complex action or mindset like racism is something that can be a symptom of any illness like bipolarism. And clearly the point of doing that is for this idea that we have of justice. What we are looking for in that scenario is not what we're trying to find by determining whether or not something is caused by bipolarism is whether or not the person is good or bad. It is not about whether or not they should be held accountable. They should. Clearly, we've already gotten past that point in the conversation. It is definitely acknowledged that Kanye West need to be held accountable. Admittedly, what people want to know now is how should he be held accountable? Because we do have procedures for these kinds of things. We have at least like even unspoken ethical behaviors into how we deal with people who are compromised in some fashion or another. And the problem is there are times when people are not looking for rehabilitation. I feel like at the core of these actions we take, the reasons why we talk about things the way we do, we are not looking to see something as realistic as it is in this unfortunate, unforgiving universe. We are trying to look for a sense of good and evil in the world, and unfortunately, you're not going to find it. It is a fool's errand trying to find some essence of good or evil. I feel like I understand it's easier for me to say that, and I try not to be callous about that nature, knowing that like not everyone thinks that way. And it doesn't mean that I'm right and other people are wrong, but people are not wired that way. And I feel like from a utilitarian standpoint, what I have been experiencing in the last 20 years of my observation of justice and what people are searching for out of justice, what it is that people want, listening to other people's commentary on justice and right and wrong and the system and, crime and punishment, just generally these systems, it is definitely understood that people are looking, people are looking for accountability, they're looking for whether or not the person is good or bad. Whereas I'm typically going to explain not that they are good or that they are bad or that good and bad don't exist. I'm probably just going to say it doesn't matter. If you really care, if you have what it would be an ideal concern for humanity, that does not matter. That is not to say that I don't get upset. That is not to say that I don't get offended by any means. I'm not claiming that I don't get angry. The problem is, for the last 20 years, I've been working on my responses to the things that offend me and questioning not just why I am offended by things, but rather what offense is. What it means for me to be offended by something in relation to my analysis of it. I'm not going to lie to you. Most criminals, in my most basic primal human behaviors, yeah, I do like to see people get comeuppance. But when I'm actually consciously, hopefully rationally thinking about what I need to see in this world of people who do bad things, I just need to see them separated. I need time to grieve who has been hurt, and I need to see that person isn't continuing to get away with it. That they are separated from society in some fashion, if nothing else for their own good. Or rather, not if nothing else, but including for their own good. Sometimes people need to go to jail. Sometimes people need their phone taken. And it is a complicated line to tightrope walk. Determining what is actual freedom and what is legitimately encroaching on other people's freedom. I am still definitely going to talk about that Kanye West controversy one of these days, because there was some trespassings there by white America. But the point she was making and that I'm making is you can't explain that so simply. You cannot explain why this person did this thing, why this person was making these statements simply by the fact that other people have had bipolarism and didn't do that. Other people have diseases where they shit on themselves, and other people have the same diseases and don't shit on themselves. But there's probably a reason why this person is shit on themselves that could be contributed to by that disease. And unfortunately, that is the way that I hear people talk about Chris Benoit. It's always something along the lines of, I have seen, not every person who has CTE unalives a person. This isn't the cause of his actions. There are people who have been abusive and haven't unalived their family. There have been people who have had CTE and weren't abusive or have mental problems. They don't even mention, often people don't even mention the same mental problems, but they'll say there are people who've had mental problems and they aren't abusive to their family. I think this is attributed to something else, like him being an evil person, that thing that does not exist in reality. There's no such thing as evil. And this is literally just me responding to like stuff I was seeing online. I'm not actually upset about that. That video was a joke. Maybe it was kind of crass joke. Maybe it was in poor taste. But I'm not upset at people for talking shit about Chris Benoit. Again, I'm not defending that motherfucker. That is not happening. I'm not your fucking hero, edgelord. So I'm just gonna hit pause for a second and try to describe what I'm feeling kind of is the problem here, or try to elaborate on what I believe the problem is that I am describing. It is that we are looking not at an empirical situation with the limited information that we have when we witness a crime or a wrongdoing on part of a person who can be identified or is under suspicion of suffering particular mental illnesses. The problem is this knee-jerk response that I've always seen with minorities and oppressed groups, where there are times we feel there's a utilitarian purpose to overlook what is true and accurate for the sake of protecting an image. I will often make this reference that I don't know how people feel about this. A lot of things in my life, I feel like I can reference what I felt had to have been the experience of many Muslim Americans throughout the 2000s, like to date, where there was a point in my life where I felt like I came to realize there is no way that every person that comes from a traditionally Muslim family, especially my age, is devout and pious. There have to be a lot of people out there, even people who I see at times like really touting sacred ideals of Islam or sticking up for Islam in the face of a white supremacist society, that themselves would say, I'm not terribly devout. Like, I don't really feel a lot for any religion. There have to be, honestly, a lot of atheist children that come from Muslim families, but there's something about Western culture when you have to be able to say, I can't let these white people talk shit about this religion like that. I've personally felt that in relation to Christianity many a times, and like the things that people will say about particular sects of Christianity that they find weirder than other sects. I'm like, watch your fucking mouth. Like, I'm not trying to be defensive of something here, but I am going to call you out on some bullshit you're talking. And it felt like that is definitely, I feel like there needs, the reason I even had to describe all of what I just said feels like you need a short word to describe that behavior sociologically. I don't know if there is one, but that is a thing that I feel like people feel a need to do, like a defense mechanism, when it's just like, I can't have you tearing down something else, even if I have to speak somewhat out of step with what I actually feel or know. So when I'm describing about drawing these conclusions about what a person can or cannot be capable of when they have a particular mental illness, I feel like it is our knee-jerk response to attempt to protect the community from stigma. Because I guess that's the other thing I should say about that example I even used about Islam, is it is an attempt to protect a community from becoming stigmatized. It is a stigma, an irrational stigma rejection. That would be I feel like that would be a terrible term to use sociologically for that. But I feel like in claiming that a person who commits a crime or does something, what you could say immoral or is opposed to mores, is something that is unethical, just out of step with society, something that is deviant. Someone who does something deviant, who coincidentally has a mental disorder of some sort, it feels like we will not allow that mental disorder to even be a sufficient condition. well enough a necessary one, because we don't want examples of people who will not do this, who have not done this and may never do this thing. We don't want them associated with someone else's shortcomings. So we want to say it has to be something else that is involved in that person who did that thing. Don't tag this onto their mental illness. My problem with that, two things. One I just thought of is like, whatever you're eventually going to try to attribute this to, it may still eventually be connected to some community that you are going to want to protect at some point. But, I mean, potentially, that can happen. You could just keep passing the buck on what you think is the cause of this. My problem is, just as much as you can't necessarily attribute the behavior to someone's illness, you can't necessarily prove that the illness has nothing to do with it. And it shows me, this is the problem I'm getting at, that we're focusing less on the empirical matter and what we think about this instant, this given situation that we are observing as one instant in time, one incident, one thing that we need to focus on and take into consideration all the details of, and instead are trying to either develop and or reconcile the identity politics we have already developed in our head. We can't acknowledge that a celebrity would do something, would say something horrible tied to a mental problem they have, like bipolarism, because it develops a new shorthand, piss poor conclusion that society will have about bipolar people. That is not the fault, that is not necessarily building a stigma to avoid doing that, but that is us falling victim to stigma when we can't reason to ourselves that this isn't grounds to attack people who have bipolarism or CTE, or in relation to attacking, just making claims about who they are or what their problems are or what they do. That's the conclusion that I'm coming to, is like, we have a problem in understanding what our focus should be when we see the ethical trespasses of people. Now, if I can just talk kind of personal for a minute, just as I felt like I'm not putting this whole video on TikTok any damn ways, clearly, and I might as well just re-record the last part of that video that I was saying, because I also forgot to record parts. It wouldn't have fit. I had to type up a bunch of little notes and everything to make sense of what I was saying. So I'm just going to re-record this part in discussing something rather personal, and something that took place in my own life in relation to loved ones. And get some water and get through the rest of this day. Okay. So I'm about to talk about some pretty personal stuff. That person that I was discussing at the beginning of this video, the friend of mine who I would have these conversations with, one or two, if that, conversations about Chris Benoit years ago. This is a person that I care very much about. I love them. And I will fully acknowledge she has done horrible things to me. Horrible things. That honestly, whether we can reconcile these things or not, I have been, to some degree or another, scarred. This may, even just to some small degree, some of these things will affect me, just as memories for the rest of my life. And she is never really taken accountability for it. This person, I want to say, before I really even knew them, other people who have been aware of her have said things to me. She's somewhat of a pariah of sorts. She's developed some reputations among some people in the places she's lived, where I feel like friends, and sometimes friends who do not always have the best takes on people or their behaviors, somewhat patriarchal, chauvinistic, Western takes that many of us can have within ourselves, would in very short just tell me, stay away from that person. You don't want to be friends with that person. That person is a piece of shit. You know, that kind of thing, where, like, trust me, that's a shitty person. You don't want to get involved with them. I've had that kind of narrative thrown before. I like to make my own decisions in these respects. And the more that I got to know this person, the more that I understood that where some people would talk with them that way, some people would talk to this person that way. It's completely understandable that a lot of people would look at these behaviors if they knew the details and say, there's some narcissistic tendencies there. Honestly, at the end of the day, some of that shit is bordering on sociopathy. And yet I understand, when I am consciously thinking about the matter, not driven entirely by my emotions, that this person is, one, for a long time that I've known them, definitely been through some inducing of psychosis that just no one was noticing or doing anything to help with. And two, this person, as easily as everyone else can describe them, I feel could just as easily be described as an autistic person who has suffered a lifetime of emotional, mental, and physical abuse. And more than likely just has complex post-traumatic disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder. I would definitely say that this is not the only person in my life who was like, fuck me over in the last 2 years. I have been taking it left and right from people I was trying to help. And sometimes this came down to like family members. And honestly, it's really hard to know that, like, I am carrying this on my own because I don't like talking to people about it anymore. Every once in a while, I'll share information I think is appropriate to share, but I don't like to get too into the details because I'm also monitoring the people I say these things to. And there's a lot of problems there with, like, the advice that people typically want to give, especially from a Western consumerist standpoint, because it always seems so reasonable to them and it seems so rational to them, but usually it is only coming across as callous because I know what's supposed to be a reasonable bit of advice about prioritizing myself and how I can't help others without helping myself. Like, that's not something I'm already thinking about. The reality is, I'm just being told to cut people off. I am being told to cut people out of my life. And a lot of times, it can be summed up as like shitty black social media advice that I'm not looking for. Facebook posts with, like, if not old black greeting cards on them, like black greeting card illustrations, then like some minion shit that like very angry single black moms post on Facebook. I'm like, this is very amateur psychology that you should not be taking upon yourself. This isn't necessarily healthy for you, and it's not helping you find the peace that you're looking for. These are shitty colloquialisms that are actually probably way more toxic than you're giving credit for. But that's just what I'm comparing the advice that comes to me to. Admittedly, though, still, it's not the worst. It's not the farthest from apt of a comparison, because so often that is just what I'm getting is, man, you need to stop. You're doing this too much. And it's like, no, you're reacting to what I'm presenting, to the stress that I'm presenting. You're reacting to the fact that I am talking about something that is doing that I'm not necessarily always doing well with, something that I've gotten hurt by, something that I could have just gotten the worst case scenario or close to it, where it's just like, this doesn't happen to everyone who tries to help people, but I just ended up in a perfect storm. And you're also thinking about how you wouldn't let this shit happen to you. The fact of the matter is, I don't talk to people about being some sort of fucking empath or anything like that, but I am constantly observing the behaviors of others. And even if I can't necessarily compare the person in their entirety to myself, I am trying to understand empathy cognitively, at least. Understanding what connections there are between myself and other people, even just on the most elementary level, and what that person must be feeling. I don't want anyone who is looking for help, even if it's not obvious, to not receive it. It's not good for the species in general. So I am definitely in a position where I know I'm never going to be told that even people who I can tell are having trouble coming to terms with things or speaking to me about things or reconciling, people who can't necessarily, who don't seem like they can even take accountability for what they've done because of their mental problems. I need to know the difference between boundaries, like actually developing boundaries to protect myself and the utilitarian purpose of that, and the desire for what I consider justice by just cutting a person off. Because that's what it all comes down to me. I mean, that's what it all comes down to me. It seems to me that people are looking for what they understand to be justice. That is a fucking fairy tale in your head that I've just been trying to observe for 20 years now, what it is that people call justice. And the justice is just consistency, which I understand. Consistency is beautiful. Consistency is necessary. It is definitely one of the things that I'm most looking for in the natural world. But I only care about it as a tool. I only care about it as the rubric. I need the consistency for what is the utilitarian good, not for the Kantian belief that there needs to be this continuing balance. I don't need to know that somebody was punished for the thing that they did wrong. I need to know that the thing that they did wrong, if it had actual victims, it's not happening to other victims. And if that involves a person needing to be punished, you can tell me logically and scientifically you are assured that this is a solution to stopping that from happening, then I will support it. But I'm not doing this on the basis of justice. Because that, to me, how y'all don't fucking get this sometimes, I don't understand, that still looks to me like the same shit that parents have to deal with all the time, with someone feeling like they need to get their lick back. You do not hit a fucking kid because another kid hit them, or because that kid hit another kid. You don't try to even shit out. You don't, in any fashion, not just in the matter of like the equal exchange or some eye for an eye bullshit, but you don't even need a response, like a reaction to people doing wrong things, unless the only way that makes sense is for me to think that is just a fault in our evolution. That's a fault in our development. That is a thing that unfortunately a human being needs to do to comprehend something. They have to be driven by, I guess, some sort of chemical change. You need the sensation of being upset about something to be moved to action. In that respect, that's still a utility. I can get that. That's utilitarian. In any case, I still need to know what my purpose is of wanting to see something right done. And my purpose is not about rightfully tearing down someone else that I'm upset with. Even if I do it. That's why it's always a joke for me. It's always tongue in cheek, because I know I probably shouldn't be doing it anyways. If I wasn't doing it out of humor, I'd be doing it out of anger. When I'm shitting on a person who has some sort of trespass in their history. And I'm trying to like keep myself away from that. Keep myself from the mindset of looking for revenge and looking for, looking for comeuppance. I love when comedians are willing to talk shit about a disgraced celebrity, and it's legitimately coming from a place of comedy and taking the piss out of them. It's not even from a grounds of saying that they deserve this, but like, it's the least you can handle is like people making sure that everyone hears what's wrong with you if you're not going to take accountability for yourself. It's another place when I have to listen to the soapboxing and the virtue signaling. I didn't need that shit. I knew the right from wrong. I did not need the commentary on Louis C.K. because I was already making the commentary on Louis C.K. Like, people were already talking shit about him, but you got holier than thou when you started talking shit about him, and that's when I tuned out. But then again, maybe that's just me. Maybe people do need that. People need the fury. People need to be upset in order to keep that matter of consistent fight against wickedness in their world, against the problems. But you've heard what I've had to say about the people in my own life, that I'm going to know better than someone fucking up like Kanye West, which, with the difference being that someone like that, pure speculation on my part, but because it's pure speculation, I'm keeping kind of distant with my judgments. I'm keeping kind of fucking distant. I am using a lot of contingencies here with the people that, and this is driven by the fact that the people I do know closer, I have too many experiences of trying to observe them and understanding, yeah, there's a possibility that other people could be right, that this has more to do with my perspective of these people, and the fact that, or in short and crass description, I could be considered too forgiving or too patient with them, where in my personal experience, I feel like my observation is a bit more apt when I can say I recognize this behavior. I recognize this thing. Maybe it took me a day, maybe it took me a week or a month, maybe it took half or a full year before I had realized. I think the reason that person was doing that, without me rationalizing the matter entirely or fabricating the matter in my head, stems from this way that they see things. This way that they may have a problem with seeing things because they're 30-something years old, well into the spectrum, like not like undiagnosed autistic, and nothing has ever changed. Their development has been done through this lens from childhood that no one has ever been involved in. And I know people who are probably way less severe in their comprehension of social faux pas who I have just as much trouble having the discussion with. You can have just as much trouble trying to explain to them something that is ethically right or wrong that they just never saw that way before. It's not easy. This life shit isn't easy, and I can definitely tell you the same thing I've always said specifically about Kanye West when it comes down to people wondering if someone can condone his behavior or defend him. The idea is, you don't have to give a shit about that bipolar man. You don't have to give a shit about his illness. You don't have to give a shit about him at all. It is not your obligation in the slightest. You do not have an obligation to be concerned for anybody's health other than people you're responsible for. That said, it all comes down to how much you care. And I'm just going to be grossed out if I feel like the concept of mental health and the discussion of it is just a commodity for like social capitalism. Like, it's just a talking point on social media that America's not concerned enough with to actually be more informed with than, I mean more informed than just like knowing what a particular mental illness is, like an awareness month thing. No, I mean like understanding psychology better, understanding sociology better, understanding ethics. Like, as a society, do we want to better understand each other at all? Like, because it's not easy. That's what I'm asking. It's like, I'm gonna tell you right now, this shit's not easy. It's not always fun. So the question is, how much do you care? Do you really give a shit about mental health? Because some people do. I think a lot of us don't as much as we think. I'm actually really glad that, like, the people in my life who've fucked me over here and there, by the way, all the people I can even think of right now, pretty much children who've suffered trauma and don't know how to interact with people very well, and for that matter, how to trust people. Like, victims are fucking dangerous. Victims will do some heavy shit, especially when they're neurodivergent. You do not want to warp the mind of a person who is already not quite getting social interaction, especially from a very young age. We shouldn't abuse anyone, but Jesus Christ, when you abuse an autistic kid, you are fucking hurt. You're making a problem for the rest of us. I am really glad that the people in my life who clearly have had mental problems and have come into question for their behavior in front of other people and have even crossed me, unfortunately, I still have opportunities to make things right with them and to someday get them on a path that is healthier for them and for our relationships. I don't like the idea that we stop trying. Because what the fuck else are you going to do until you die, really? Yet another day of recording. Check this shit out. This new glasses and everything. Anyways, there's this last little bit of this. You don't. The video is over. The video is done. But there's this last little bit I want to talk about where I'm effectively about to talk about narcissism. If you feel like sticking around, it's probably going to be about 20 minutes, and it's particularly me. It's me speaking in reference to what I talked about in that last bit about the person. Two things. One, generally talking about narcissism, and I am going to tie it into everything I've been talking about in this video. And two, I feel like it's kind of my response to the inevitable counterpoints of anyone that would watch that last part of the video talking about the personal experiences and everything. I feel like I know where that conversation goes from this point and what most people would take from it if anyone even did watch it. So that's what this next little bit is going to be about, if you care to look into it. Or fuck it, you are strong-willed if you got this far. I feel like this is the point, what I just said is the point where someone would claim this person is fucking with you. This person sounds like they don't feel empathy, and if anything, you're feeling that this person is more empathetic or is suffering more than they're actually letting on. And to that, I tend to ask, what is the end game? I am not saying that a number of these neurological problems don't persist, and that what we would have to, in some sort of definition of empathy, or rather a definition of the process of having empathy, I would not say that neurologically that doesn't occur in some people. I would say that we already have this bias that comes from not understanding that people who would be considered narcissists, or that once upon a time would have been on a spectrum of mental disorders referred to as sociopathy, that these people who may show signs of antisocial disorders or just something else that's being misdiagnosed in that way, we pretend as though they simply don't have feelings. That is what we conflate with not being empathetic, is to conclude that they simply don't have feelings. And that is so insanely far from the experience I have of watching people like this who trespass, who mess up. And don't get me wrong, I've had these discussions before with people about what I felt needed to be understood as the difference between guilt and shame, comprehending that a lot of people believe themselves to feel guilty about their trespasses when in reality they're just ashamed. This oversimplified explanation that I think most people would get immediately is wanting to say you only feel bad because you got caught. But that is, in short and in crude summation, what I'm talking about. The idea is that you feel poorly about people being upset with you. You feel poorly because of the image that is being created of you. You feel poorly about being targeted. Supposedly that is the idea of what we once would have talked about in relation to sociopaths and psychopaths. Is like a lot of the charm that would come out of these people is to try desperately to keep the trust of those around you, to simplify your situation, knowing that it is antisocial. your behavior specifically is antisocial. So yeah, these types of people are typically not trying to piss anyone off. It makes their lives harder. I mean, if you were showing signs of social apathy or something like that, it may be easier for you not feeling empathy, or if you were in that spectrum of what we used to refer to as psychopathic and were showing a great deal of aggression, there's something that you probably get out of specifically targeting a person and taking advantage of them, using them, manipulating them, harming a person. But nonetheless, you don't just do this to large scores of people because you are making yourself unsafe in that scenario. The wild thing about this person and other people I've known like them is they're not stupid people, and yet they do constantly end up in that situation of upsetting many people, knowing how detrimental it would be to their well-being. They burn a lot of bridges, and it is not that hard to see in them that they are not wanting to do that. They are not wanting to upset people like that, and it's hard to watch a person get to a point, likely because of having CPTSD, where they realize, I can't even interact with people. I can't talk to people anymore. I have become agoraphobic to some degree. I can't engage in social scenarios as much as I may keep my distance, even if I have to be in a social situation. I will talk with the person as little as possible because I am terrified that I am going to explode. I'm terrified that I'm going to snap or go off the handle or behave in some sort of antisocial, deviant fashion. People are not actively wanting to do that. People who are legitimately diagnosed as narcissistic would not be crying about how they don't understand how they even got to this point, or that they didn't used to be like this. Those are people who have usually, again, what would have been referred to as antisocial sociopathic disorders, something that people can often point out begins maybe often early on in a person's life, maybe before a time that they actually remember, but often in response to trauma. Share a very personal moment. One of the first times I was hanging out with this person, we did end up going to a dispensary, and I didn't realize how much I was actually responsible for what was going on there. Because at one point, I wanted to let this person go with an employee because I felt like I was treating it like a medical matter. Like I was effectively saying, you know, the doctor will see you now. Go into the back. I will be right here waiting for you when you come out. I'll be in the waiting room. I'm here for moral support, but I figured this is probably the appropriate place to wait in that moral support. This fucked them up. Like the moment that I told them I'll be waiting up here, you can go ahead with that dude. They effectively said they were shocked for a moment and then said, I'm just gonna go now. Like, let's just leave. I'm gonna leave now. I don't want to be here anymore. And trying to find out why, turns out that person explicitly pointed out, you abandoned me. It feels like you abandoned me. And that's the kind of anecdotal commentary that a lot of people have bells running off in their head right now. Like, that's it. Yeah, that person's clearly, this person you're talking about, she's a narcissist. That sounds like some manipulative shit a narcissist would say. Yeah, you're still fucking grasping at straws. I'm not saying that you're reaching in the connotation that people typically think of to say, like, you're wrong for making that conclusion. I'm saying you're knee-jerking more than you fucking think you are. And you're probably reaching from, once again, anecdotal experiences. I explained to someone earlier today, we are not going to get away from this current period of amateur diagnosis of narcissists in America right now, and in, like, at least social media culture. That's not probably going to stop for fucking years. That is not going to be a trend, specifically because it deals so much with personal pain. Most people, no one wants to seem like they're just speaking anecdotally, or that they're speaking out of turn, or that they're making too many presumptions. But most people will probably admit, if you're the loudest about what it means to be a narcissist or identifying narcissists, you are probably a person who could claim to have been the victim of a narcissist. And you can't point that out to many people who would say that shit, or people who would claim to be the victim of narcissism, Because you really can't speak in opposition to a person that claims to be the victim of a narcissist, because it is just considered crass. It is like not believing a woman who has claimed to have been a victim of abuse. You can't tell a person who was suffering in a relationship that the person they were suffering under was not necessarily a narcissist, or you don't have proof of them being a narcissist. They just want to be believed. It is complicated. It is a difficult thing to discuss in this culture, but it has to be discussed at some point. Anyways, I know there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction there. I'm saying in that anecdotal story, in that moment, in my experience, I had to go through the reality of realizing that a person really felt like they can't function. And I know from what I knew about this person to some degree beforehand, and the things I would learn in years ahead, was in her head that was abandonment. She had to attribute a terrible thing that happened to her to someone, and that someone was me for allowing it to happen. The terrible thing that happened was that she lost her support guide, like her support animal, in the middle of something that's already too stressful for her to deal with, given the things that she was going through at the time, the mental issues, the illnesses, the lack of medication and treatment and therapy. She was very fucking lost in most real life social interactions. She was putting forth a great deal of effort, unbeknownst to me, to stay far away from people, and she was kind of trusting me, if she was going to be out in public, to be supportive of that, to be the person who would be there to help her in this issue of being in public and dealing with a business transaction of some sort. And in that scenario, I just said, all right, good luck, and just I was about to just fade out of the scene and leave her by herself, like a fucking guide NPC character in a video game. Like, I was just going to disappear and be like, hey, you got that item I gave you? Let's see how well you deal with it on your own. That she was just left there, and it was infuriating for her in so many ways she probably couldn't even put into words or fathom at the moment. And it really fucked her up. But it's really hard to just listen to people see these situations, hear these situations, and trying to be realistic, just callously write off the matter. I think you're reading too much into it. I think you were being manipulated by a narcissist, man. Because they're everywhere, you know. They're all over the place. And, like, every fucking doctor wants to tell you, will you stop fucking saying that, please? Like, there's a lot of times when we would point out narcissistic tendency, but the professionals are seeing this as a problem in social media. They're seeing this as a goddamn problem, where everyone else is trying to point out, hey, we got the symptoms right here. We have the symptoms of narcissism, and you guys need to acknowledge you've been in narcissistic relationships, where I feel like something that's going to need to be said about this medical issue moving forward is that y'all can't diagnose shit worth a damn, because specifically you don't understand that just using a rubric or a checklist of the things that bother you is probably one of the leading problems of the medical field in the first place, misdiagnosing things for decades. Just trying to find I'm not going to say slapdash, but what you hoped would be a definitive example of a rubric to identify a disease, and just telling people go down this checklist and it's proof that that person is what you're saying they are. This type of behavior is the reason the psychological community spent decades saying, hey, don't diagnose children. Don't try to diagnose children as psychopaths or sociopaths. Let's wait a bit more. Let's do a little bit more examination, specifically from the stance of a professional, instead of just having people call other people out. This is the reason that, as much as pretty obvious about Donald Trump, we don't need people claiming, hey, the president of the United States is obviously a narcissist psychopath. It's like, maybe don't set that precedent. Maybe just stop doing that. There's more pseudoscience involved in the day-to-day life you live than you probably want to give credit for. I'm not saying that my conclusions are perfect, I'm really not. I know that a lot of my stuff is still anecdotal, and it is still my personal experiences with observing a person, the same as anybody else who has examined their personal experiences with their significant other or some person, their family member, their parent, or whoever that they've spent a lot of time around, and unfortunately came to an opposite conclusion. But the thing you need to understand is, it's not like I don't have to think about that shit. It is not at all like I just wanted to rule out that someone was a narcissist because I care about them, because they're a family member, a loved one, a friend, or something like that. That is not what is happening here. That is an unfortunate truth I have to think about every day about multiple people. But first and foremost, I'm thinking about what it means to be in the position you're in, experiencing the things that you experience, whatever your mental condition is. And despite the commentary that is taking place right now about us focusing more on the interesting factors of narcissists or other people with mental illnesses as opposed to their victims, I'm never going to stop thinking about the victims. And you can take some solace in that, while still understanding I'm not going to stop thinking about the victims of the mental illness. It's not going to fucking happen. I don't think I'm thinking about them more than I'm thinking about their victims either. I am specifically taking those victims into consideration every time that I don't forget that I can't gauge what a person is or is not intentionally doing. I am not trying to gauge whether or not the narcissist is actually evil or that they're unforgivable for their actions. I'm literally trying to understand, is this person behind the 8 ball as much as any one of us? Because when it does come down to the ethics, when it does come down to the question of right and wrong, not even right and wrong, but whether or not a person is good or bad, I am always going to be asking, do you know for sure that this person wants to do this? Is it something against their will? And is your simple answer something as ridiculous as what my friend was asking, which is like, well, why don't you just end yourself so you don't hurt other people? That's the only noble thing to do, you less than human person. And that's one of the bigger problems about this person that I felt like kind of stuck out to me from that commentary I mentioned earlier, that seemed like it was out of desperation to compare Chris Benoit to this other person who ended their own life. The question was, is this hitting close to home? Do you feel like, I'm not going to go into the details about why I think this person may have ever been potentially a person who could have been suffering CPT. I don't think that that is the case necessarily. But whatever the case, there are other mental illnesses that can make a person feel like they can't go on living, particularly because of the things that they seem they can't control about themselves. And that scared me. I was thinking, like, I don't think that this person is necessarily suicidal. I felt like I've seen examples where even they would have had to acknowledge, like, I've been there, I've been to some bad places, but I still feel like we got to points where they could convince me I have no plans to end my own life. But thinking about those times where it was bad enough, where they were seeming like they were prepared for it, naturally, I was thinking about this matter, and in the sense of, are you trying to rationalize what that woman did because it's relatable to you? Do you think that this is something you would have to reason at some point to protect other people, maybe to protect your kids, to protect your family? And it's pretty sad. I like to make one more comparison. What this person actually does is very much reminiscent of what has been discussed in online scenarios of the relationship typically shown between millennials and their parents. I'm not talking about any specific person. I'm not necessarily talking about myself. I'm talking about an ongoing conversation that has happened to varying degrees that millennials have to keep bringing up. And I'm sure there have been other examples in generations, but this is specifically something that millennials openly talk about in relation to themselves, their relationship between them and their parents, and potentially their parents' relationship with their own parents. There's like 3 basic things, I think it is, 3 bullet points you can always keep in mind about that discussion of millennial parents and how they refer to how millennial parents will respond to effectively millennial accusations of abuse. The typical conclusion is denying that any abuse ever took place or that it was as bad as it was. If the example is actually described to those parents in such a way that they could not deny that this was an example of abuse, the next step is pretty much to claim that you don't have any memory of doing something like that. So you either claim that it didn't happen through denial or that it wasn't as severe as it was made out to be. If that doesn't work, then you claim to not remember any occasion of this. And if that doesn't work, if a millennial's parent has to come to a point of acknowledging that these things did happen and that they did do them, the next step in the denial is just to point out that it wasn't as bad as what happened to them. That the spread of abuse is justified through the fact that it wasn't real abuse because someone, their parents, did worse to them. They have suffered things of the like in their own lifetime, and this is a poor attempt at saying sorry. I guess it's like maybe some people throw it in like, so I'm sorry that this happened to you, that this thing that I did happened to you. But shit is hard all over, man. And that is definitely what my experience with this person was, and with some other people I've seen with my own eyes. I've seen her do this to other people, effectively fall into that same millennial parent behavior. Either boomers or Xers, who were the parents of millennials, both I feel can definitely fall under that category. People who would typically have to say to their millennial children, or what she would typically have to say of things that she trespassed or did or said to someone that was horrible. The way she would treat people that was horrible would come down to saying, that didn't happen, or claiming specifically, because this was also induced psychosis, and there was some drinking involved, some blacking out, a lot of years of being able to say that didn't happen, and specifically reasoning that while she doesn't remember it, she would never do that, rationalizing I would never do that, or claiming it's really hard for me to believe people because I know some people will manipulate me, so it's hard for me to believe when someone says that I do something. But she would claim that the things didn't happen, and leading into the second matter, one of the main reasons she would claim things didn't happen is because it didn't supposedly sound like her, and more importantly, she doesn't remember it happening. This is where a lot of the trauma comes from, the relationships with people who are connected somehow to blackout alcoholics, among celebrities as well. And of course, when she could not deny that someone, like doing something in real time and not being able to deny that this was happening, falling back on saying, I've had it worse, which I would acknowledge was true. I would see these things and acknowledge, like, you're not telling me anything new here. You think I don't pay attention to the stories? You think I don't know you from the things you've been willing to divulge to me? I know what you've been through. I can determine things that you've been through that you haven't been explicit from, just from the hints of the things that you have let go. Like, I feel like more so than anybody else, you probably personally know I am aware and concerned with your history, with what people have done to you. And I sincerely hope that we can work through this in your lifetime. But there is the place that I'm stuck in between having to work with a person who is showing this deviant behavior that I have to try to be understanding of, depending on how much I care, and other people saying, you need to stop, because that person is clearly just evil. Or if I don't want to present them as evil, the problem can't be that I'm callous. It must just be that you're being too patient. You're being too forgiving. You need to know when to say when. And that's your problem, is you don't know when to say when. What people don't get is that even if nothing was happening to me, you'd be claiming the same goddamn thing. The most callous people I know, which are not necessarily bad people, but unfortunately they're also typically neurodivergent and don't realize how often they're doing things from Kantian stances rather than from a utilitarian standpoint, or even something that really shows their empathy. It's more so trying to impose your worldview and your idea of right and wrong. It is fucking DFA. What is it, DFA or DPA? Something like that. It's defiance, motherfucker. It has a whole lot to do with you trying to impose your perspective on the world, and the world constantly denying you that perspective that you need. That's where a lot of that Kantian bullshit comes from, particularly in identity politics. Identity politics. The point being, there's not a lot that is empirical or utilitarian in these commentaries. But I have to think back on that time that this person felt that I abandoned them. A moment where anyone else would look at it and say, like, no, that's toxic and abusive behavior. Like, people do that in relationships specifically all the time. Like, dudes will do that shit to their girlfriends. People in actual relationships will... I mean, this isn't terribly different from the behavior of some guy claiming that he's going to end himself if, like, he doesn't get what he wants from his significant other, if he doesn't get the attention that he's looking for, if he doesn't get a particular type of attention, if he's not getting sex, if he's not getting, or if she's not willing to stay in the relationship. That is some diabolical, toxic shit. And it is comparable to what was happening here, but the question is the cause. There's a lot of things that could be reminiscent of that behavior that may be completely unrelated, honestly. And my thing is acknowledging that in that moment, when I experienced that, I had an opportunity. I don't necessarily know that I was in full comprehension or what I would have done differently if I had known better later, but I can definitely say from that time moving forward, I have had opportunity to look at that situation and say, this is a red flag. Maybe I should step away from here. Maybe this is a job for a professional. But I can also understand that this comes down to how much I personally care. I don't have an obligation, but I am seeing a person in front of me, and I am making a conscious decision to acknowledge that that person, while they aren't the conventional victim, they're at least not in respect to what I'm currently dealing with. In other respects, very much a traditional victim. But in respect to this, they are mentally ill. They are a mentally ill person. And in this particular respect, I have to make the decision about how much I care about a person's mental health, about how much danger I feel they're actually in, about how much suffering I think they're actually going through, and if there's anything that I can do about it.